2 days after I buried my daughter, my son-in-law looked me in the eye and told me to get out of the house. My name is Richard Miller, and at 65 years old, I thought I had already faced the hardest trials life could throw at me. But nothing prepared me for losing Emily, my only child, my pride and joy, and then being treated like an unwelcome stranger in the very place she had always called home. Grief has a way of hollowing you out, but betrayal cuts deeper than any grave. Jason, my son-in-law, believed he was the man of the house, the rightful owner of the walls around us. For years he strutted with that confidence, certain he held all the cards. What he didn't know, what he couldn't even imagine, was that for nearly a quarter of a century, I had been holding on to a truth that could turn his world upside down in a single moment. He thought I was nothing more than an old handyman patching leaks and replacing light bulbs. He thought I was dependent, weak, easy to discard. But sometimes the people you underestimate the most are the ones carrying the heaviest secrets. And the secret I had kept for Emily's sake was about to change everything. Before we continue, please take a second to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. Your support helps us share stories that matter, and I promise you'll want to hear how this one unfolds. When Emily first fell ill, I knew the road ahead would be long and cruel, but I had no idea just how quickly time could slip away when measured in hospital visits and chemotherapy sessions. For 8 months I watched my daughter fade, sitting beside her bed day after day, listening to the doctors speak in measured tones, and the machines hum their constant reminders of mortality. Jason, meanwhile, seemed far more concerned with trivial inconveniences than the suffering right in front of him. He grumbled about parking fees, about the cost of gas for the drive, about how it was all such a drain on his schedule. Once, when I caught him scrolling on his phone during one of Emily's treatments, he muttered without looking up, "Can't you just visit on weekends, Richard? This is killing me financially." That was the first moment I saw the crack in the carefully constructed image he had sold to Emily and to the neighbors, that of a successful, devoted husband. The funeral came on a gray Monday, a service heavy with grief and silence, and I thought, naively, that Jason and I would grieve together. Surely the love we both had for Emily would bind us, if only temporarily. But by Wednesday evening, less than 48 hours later, he cornered me in the kitchen, his phone in hand, not even meeting my eyes as he said, "Richard, I've been thinking, this house is too big for just one person. Honestly, I need a fresh start. You understand, right?" I was still in my black suit, the funeral program tucked into my pocket like a piece of my daughter I wasn't ready to let go of, and I asked, "Where am I supposed to go?" Without hesitation, he replied that there was a place called Cedar Grove Retirement Community on the other side of town. Only $2,000 a month. Very reasonable. I nearly laughed at the absurdity. My Social Security check and modest pension together barely added up to $2,200. $2,000 was the base rate, not including meals, laundry, or medical support. By the time all of that was factored in, the cost rose to $3,500 a month. I told him I didn't have that kind of money, and for the first time he raised his eyes from his screen. What I saw chilled me, not grief, not compassion, but cold calculation. That's not really my problem anymore, is it? You've been living here rent-free for 8 years. Most people would call that generous. Rent-free, as though the groceries I bought, the utility bills I paid, the countless repairs I handled without ever asking for a dime meant nothing. As though I hadn't spent weekends on ladders fixing gutters, crawling under sinks to patch leaks, or repainting rooms so Emily could feel proud of her home. I reminded him softly that Emily wanted me there. He didn't flinch. "Emily's gone," he said flatly, "and this is my house now." The next morning I caught him in the garage, tossing Emily's photo albums into a rented dumpster. 25 years of birthdays, graduations, vacations, all of it treated like trash, because his new girlfriend Amanda didn't want clutter around when she moved in. I pulled what I could from the garbage, but most of her childhood memories were gone forever, crushed beneath stained mattresses and broken boxes. My voice shook as I said, "You're throwing away our daughter's life." Without even pausing, he replied, "She's not our daughter anymore, Richard. She was your daughter. To me, she's gone, and you're just a tenant who's overstayed his welcome." By that Wednesday night, he had changed the locks on the shed where I kept my tools. Professional-grade equipment I had collected over 4 decades in construction and real estate, tools worth more than his car. When I confronted him, he smirked and said, "Security precaution. Can't be too careful these days." Then he handed me a folded piece of paper, an official-looking 30-day eviction notice, printed on letterhead he had probably lifted from his insurance office. 30 days is the legal minimum in Texas, he said smugly. I'm being more than fair. I stared at him, disbelief mingling with rising anger. This man had never paid a cent toward the property taxes, the insurance, or even the roof repairs, yet here he was telling me he was being generous. I tried reasoning with him, suggested we talk it through, but he actually laughed. "Work what out, Richard. You're a retired handyman living on Social Security. I'm a college-educated insurance adjuster with a career. What exactly do you bring to the table?" I looked at him for a long moment, remembering the thousands of meals he'd eaten under my roof, the comfort he'd taken from the house I had provided, the thanks he'd never once offered. All I said was, "You'd be surprised." But he had already walked away, chuckling to himself, no doubt planning to brag to Amanda about how he had finally rid himself of the old man. He had no idea that by tomorrow the balance of power would shift forever. That night I sat in my bedroom, the same room Jason was planning to claim, and made a list of what I stood to lose, not just the house, though that loss alone was heavy enough. This was where Emily had taken her first steps, written her first school essay, cried into her pillow after her first heartbreak. Every wall, every floorboard carried her presence. At 65, starting over would be nearly impossible, but more than that, the thought of her memories being erased by Jason's arrogance was unbearable. I reviewed my finances. Social Security $1,600, pension $600, total $2,200 a month. Cedar Grove's base rate alone exceeded that, and other facilities cost even more, some requiring deposits of $5,000. My savings account had barely $10,000 left after covering Emily's medical bills. At best, I'd be broke before Christmas. At worst, I'd be homeless. But the darkest part wasn't financial. It was the sight of Jason pawning Emily's jewelry, her grandmother's pearls, as though her legacy were nothing more than pocket change. He spoke of estate law, claimed, "Everything belongs to me now," though he knew nothing of the law nor of the documents I had hidden away for 24 years. He believed he held all the cards, that I was powerless. But what Jason had overlooked was that quiet men often carry the longest memories, and mine stretched back to the day I purchased this house under a name he had never even heard of. The storm he thought he was unleashing on me was about to turn, and when it did, he would never see it coming. Thursday morning, I woke up earlier than usual, staring at the ceiling of a bedroom that suddenly felt more like borrowed space than my own sanctuary, and I realized Jason truly believed he had already won. He had the keys, he had the arrogance, and he had a piece of paper that looked official enough to intimidate anyone who didn't know better. What he didn't have was the full story, and that was about to make all the difference. I pulled out the box I had hidden in the back of Emily's closet, a box she never questioned because she trusted me to keep our affairs in order. Inside was the paper trail of a lifetime birth certificates, school records, and tucked carefully beneath them, the deed to 9,821 Willow Creek Lane dated March of 2001, signed not by Jason or Emily, but by Oak Ridge Investments LLC, with my name listed as managing partner. Every property tax bill for 24 years bore the same signature. Every insurance premium was paid from my accounts. I had let Jason swagger around, calling himself a homeowner, while all the while he was nothing more than a tenant without a lease. I dialed the number I hadn't called in years, Linda Harrington, my attorney, a woman I'd known since we were classmates at the University of Texas, studying business before life pulled us down different paths. She had handled my affairs for more than a decade, trusted enough that she knew when my voice carried a certain edge. "Linda," I said, "I need you to schedule a will reading for Emily tomorrow afternoon. Invite Jason, his new girlfriend Amanda, and a few others I'll name." She was quiet for a beat, then said, "Richard, what are you planning?" I told her to trust me and gave her the list. Rachel Foster from Lone Star Bank, who had managed my account since the days when Oak Ridge Investments was quietly acquiring properties across Austin. Mark Davis, my neighbor, a retired Marine who had witnessed Jason's callous behavior all week, several other neighbors who deserved to hear the truth, and finally Michael Turner, city councilman, who had once stood beside me at ribbon cuttings when my developments brought new life to our district. By the time I hung up, Linda had already sensed the storm brewing. "I'll have everyone there at 2 o'clock tomorrow," she promised. That afternoon, Jason pounded on my bedroom door, demanding to know why he'd received a formal invitation from my attorney. He waved the letter like it was a joke. "What is this, Richard? A show?" I sipped my coffee and replied calmly, "Emily had a will. It's time to read it." His laugh was sharp and mocking. "A will? If she had one, I'd know about it." He loomed over me, using his height the way bullies always do, but 40 years in construction had taught me never to back down from men like him. "There's a lot you don't know, Jason," I said evenly. Amanda shifted nervously at the table, her bathrobe half-tied, clearly out of her depth. Jason sneered. "Like what?" And I answered, "Like the difference between assuming you own something and actually owning it." Amanda glanced between us, her expression uneasy. "Maybe I should go," she whispered. Jason barked at her to stay. I leaned forward and asked him a simple question. "Have you ever seen the deed to this house? The mortgage paperwork? The tax records?" He blustered about not needing to prove anything, but the confidence was already slipping from his voice. I pressed further, mentioning that Rachel Foster from Lone Star Bank would be at tomorrow's meeting, and she could easily verify where every check had come from. Jason's face turned pale. I pulled out an old business card, Oak Ridge Investments, established 1995, and slid it across the table. He stared at it as though it were written in another language. "You're a handyman," he whispered weakly. "I was a lot of things," I said, "some of which you never bothered to ask about." Amanda's voice quavered. "Jason, what is he talking about?" But Jason waved her off, trying to act unshaken, though his hands betrayed him, twitching on the table. "You're bluffing," he muttered. I stood, adjusted my watch. An Omega Seamaster he'd seen on my wrist every day for years, but never noticed for what it really was, and said, "We'll find out tomorrow. 2 o'clock, Linda Harrington's office. Don't be late." When I left the room, I heard Amanda's voice rise in panic, demanding answers from Jason he could not give. The rest of Thursday I spent with Linda at her office, spreading out documents that hadn't seen daylight in decades. Property deeds, tax receipts, bank records, everything meticulously kept and waiting for the right moment. Linda looked at me over her glasses and said, "You've been living like a man half your worth." I nodded. "Emily asked me to. She didn't want Jason to lose his pride. But pride without gratitude becomes poison." That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how Jason had spent years convincing himself that appearances were reality. He wore suits, carried himself with arrogance, and dismissed me as an aging dependent. What he never understood was that real wealth doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it lives quietly, in old boxes of paperwork, in watches mistaken for trinkets, in tools locked away because someone thought they were just junk. By Friday, the facade Jason built would crumble, and the man who tried to evict me from my own house would discover what it felt like to stand on nothing. Friday morning arrived heavy with tension, the kind of weight you feel in your chest before a storm breaks, and I knew the day would end with truths no one in that house was prepared to face. At 7 sharp, Jason banged on my door like a man possessed, demanding answers about the so-called will reading. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair a mess, and Amanda lingered behind him, wringing her hands as if she already regretted stepping into this mess. "What are you pulling, old man?" he snapped, waving his phone. "I just got a formal invitation from your lawyer. You think you can embarrass me with some stunt?" I set my coffee on the table and looked him square in the eye. "It's no stunt. Emily had a will, and it deserves to be read." His voice rose, full of anger, but threaded with uncertainty. "If she had a will, I'd know. I was her husband." I leaned forward. "There's a lot you didn't know, Jason. You've spent 8 years pretending to be the master of this house, but pretending doesn't make it true." Amanda's face went pale. "Jason, what's he talking about?" she asked softly, but Jason brushed her off, telling her not to worry. I pressed him further, asking if he had ever actually seen the deed, the mortgage statements, or the property tax records. His mouth opened, then closed again, his bravado faltering under the weight of questions he had no answers to. I reminded him that Rachel Foster from Lone Star Bank would be present that afternoon and could clear up any confusion with documented proof. He blustered, accusing me of bluffing, but I could see the fear creeping in around the edges of his carefully constructed arrogance. When I pulled out my old Oak Ridge Investments business card and laid it in front of him, Amanda's brow furrowed. "Jason," she said sharply, "what is this? Why does he have a company card?" Jason muttered something about me trying to confuse things, but even Amanda seemed unconvinced. I stood, adjusted the cuff of my charcoal gray suit, the same suit I had worn to real estate banquets years ago, and told him, 2 o'clock, Linda Harrington's office. Bring identification. You'll need it." I left him gaping, Amanda's anxious questions chasing me down the hall. At Linda's office later that morning, I spread out documents like weapons laid carefully for battle. Linda had arranged everything: 3 thick files containing the warranty deed, the complete tax history, and a collection of photographs and awards from my development days. "Richard," she said, her voice steady but touched with curiosity. "Why now?" I stared out her window at the Austin skyline, at the buildings I had once helped shape, and answered, "Because Jason believes kindness is weakness. It's time he learned the difference." By early afternoon, Linda's conference room was prepared, a mahogany table stretching across the space, sunlight filtering through tall windows, casting a solemn glow on the scene about to unfold. Guests began to arrive. First was Mark Davis, my neighbor, carrying a manila folder thick with notes and photographs. His years as a Marine had left him sharp-eyed and meticulous, and he had documented Jason's careless behavior all week. Then came Rachel Foster from Lone Star Bank, her navy suit crisp, her briefcase heavy with records. Behind her, 3 neighbors filed in: the Whitakers, Mrs. Lee, and young Daniel from 2 houses down, all witnesses to Jason's arrogance over the years. Finally, Michael Turner, city councilman, strode in with the confidence of a man accustomed to ribbon cuttings and policy debates. He shook my hand warmly and said, "Richard, good to see you, though I'm sorry for the circumstances. Austin owes you more than most people realize." Jason and Amanda were the last to arrive, walking in like condemned souls. Jason tried to hide his unease behind a forced grin, but the sweat on his forehead betrayed him. Amanda clung to his arm, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Linda called the meeting to order, her gavel tapping against the polished table. "We're here to read the last will and testament of Emily Miller Carter, who passed on the 10th of March 2025. She began with Emily's words, bequeathing small personal items to friends, donating her car to charity, and leaving a touching letter to me, thanking me for being her anchor. My throat tightened as I listened, but I held firm. Then Linda opened the second folder. "Before we execute the will fully, we must address questions of property ownership regarding 9,821 Willow Creek Lane." Jason shifted in his seat, his bravado returning in a flash. "That's my house. Emily and I bought it in 2017. Linda slid a document across the table. "This is the warranty deed, recorded the 12th of March 2001. The purchaser was Oak Ridge Investments, LLC. The authorized signatory was Richard Miller." Silence filled the room, thick and absolute. Jason grabbed the paper, scanning it frantically, his lips moving but no words coming out. Linda continued, her tone firm. "For 24 years, all property taxes have been paid by Oak Ridge Investments. Rachel?" Rachel opened her briefcase and laid out bank records. "All payments originated from Mr. Miller's accounts. Total payments over $900,000. Amanda's eyes widened, her grip tightening on Jason's arm. "Jason, you said you bought this house," Jason stammered. "Emily told me," she said, but Linda cut him off. "Emily never said you bought it. You assumed." Mark Davis stepped forward, spreading photographs across the table, images of me at construction sites, shaking hands with mayors, receiving awards for community development. Michael Turner added his own testimony, recounting how my projects had generated millions in tax revenue for Austin. The neighbors nodded, murmuring in agreement, the truth finally rising like a tide no one could stop. Linda lifted the final document, crisp and undeniable. "Mr. Carter, you served Mr. Miller with a 30-day notice to vacate. Today, I serve you with the same." She slid the eviction notice across the table. Jason's face went white. Amanda let out a strangled cry and stood abruptly. "I can't do this, Jason. I'm sorry." She grabbed her purse and rushed out, leaving him sitting there, alone, exposed, and trembling. I watched him as he stared at the notice, his confidence shattered, and thought, for the first time in years, that justice had finally come home. The room erupted into a chaos of whispers and sharp intakes of breath, the kind of collective shock that leaves even seasoned professionals stunned. Jason sat frozen, staring at the eviction notice, as if it were written in a language he couldn't understand. His lips trembled, his hands shook visibly, and the sweat on his brow gathered into beads that rolled down his temples. Rachel Foster's calm voice sliced through the silence as she opened another folder from her briefcase. For clarity, I've brought the complete financial history of this property. Every utility bill, every tax statement, every insurance premium, all paid directly from Mr. Miller's accounts. The total investment in 9,821 Willow Creek Lane amounts to approximately $1.6 million, not including the original purchase price. She spread the documents across the table like a prosecutor laying out evidence before a jury. Jason's shoulders sagged under the weight of undeniable truth. He muttered weakly, "But I improved the house. I built a new deck." Mark Davis interjected immediately, his voice steady. "I helped load that lumber. $1,400 worth from Home Depot. Richard paid cash." Jason's eyes darted wildly, searching for a lifeline. "The water heater? The windows?" "Anderson Plumbing installed the heater. Invoice signed by Mr. Miller," I said calmly. Linda added, "The windows were purchased through Oak Ridge Investments for $8,000, September 2019, paid in full from Richard's accounts." Every attempt Jason made to claim contribution was dismantled, every excuse crumbling under the weight of receipts, witnesses, and cold numbers. Amanda's absence hung heavy in the room, the door still swaying slightly from her abrupt departure, leaving Jason visibly smaller, stripped of the facade he had clung to for years. Margaret, or rather Linda, folded her hands, her gaze sharp as glass. "Mr. Carter, do you realize what you've done? You attempted to evict the legal owner of this property. You disposed of his late daughter's belongings without permission. You pawned heirlooms of sentimental and generational value. Do you understand the legal consequences?" Jason swallowed hard, his voice breaking. I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I corrected, my voice quiet but firm. "Emily protected you for 8 years. She asked me to keep the truth from you because she thought it would crush your pride. She believed you needed to feel like a provider. She carried that burden while she was alive, and now you've repaid her sacrifice by trying to throw her father into the street before her grave is even marked." Linda reached into the thickest folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. "This letter was placed in our files in 2017, written by Emily herself." She unfolded the paper, her voice soft but unwavering as she read, "Dad, I know this arrangement is going to be hard on you, but I need you to know how grateful I am. Jason's pride wouldn't survive the truth, and if he knew you were the one paying, it would destroy him. Please let him believe this house is ours. I promise someday I'll find a way to repay you. I love you so much for making this possible. Please, never tell him. It would kill him to know he's been living on charity. Love, Emily." The silence that followed was suffocating. Jason's face crumpled, and for the first time tears spilled freely. "She knew? She protected me?" His voice cracked into a sob, raw and unrestrained. I watched him carefully, torn between anger and pity. "She knew," I said quietly, "and she shielded you until her dying day. That's the woman you betrayed when you disrespected her father and tossed her memories into a dumpster." Jason buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking violently. The man who had strutted with arrogance days earlier was gone, replaced by someone small, broken, and utterly unprepared for the consequences of his own actions. Linda tapped the table sharply. "Mr. Carter, this is no longer just a personal matter. You are officially served. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. All personal belongings must be removed. Any items left behind will be considered abandoned property." He looked up, eyes red and swollen. "But I have nowhere to go." "No one to turn to." I leaned back, repeating his own words to me just days earlier. "That's not really my problem anymore, is it?" Most people would call 8 years of free housing pretty generous. A few of the neighbors nodded in agreement. their expressions a mix of satisfaction and sympathy. Mrs. Lee spoke softly but firmly. We always wondered why Emily seemed so stressed about finances. Now we know. You never carried the weight, Jason. Richard did. Michael Turner added, his tone diplomatic but firm. This city has honored Richard for his contributions for decades. He's a man of integrity. You, on the other hand, will leave this room with your reputation in shreds. How you rebuild from here is up to you, but don't expect anyone to forget what you tried to do. Jason slumped back, his body deflating as if the very air had been drained from him. He whispered, I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I cut him off. No, Jason, you didn't care to realize. You wanted the image of success without the work, the pride of ownership without the sacrifice. Emily's compassion kept you safe from the truth, but she's gone now, and the truth has come knocking. Rachel gathered her documents neatly, her professional poise intact, but her eyes softened as she glanced at me. Richard, you've protected your daughter's memory with grace. Today, you've reclaimed more than just your property. You've reclaimed your dignity. I gave a small nod, though inside my heart was heavy with grief and relief tangled together. As people rose from the table, offering handshakes and words of support, Jason remained seated, staring blankly at the eviction notice, tears still streaking his cheeks. In that moment, I realized the tragedy wasn't that he had lost a house. The tragedy was that he had never appreciated having it in the first place. When the meeting ended, people filed out in clusters, whispering about what they had just witnessed, but Jason stayed slumped in his chair, staring at the eviction notice as though sheer willpower could change the words on the page. I gathered my documents slowly, deliberately, giving him no more attention than I would a stubborn child. Linda placed her hand on my shoulder, leaning in to say, Richard, expect him to fight this. Desperate men will grasp at anything. I nodded. Let him try. Emily's truth is stronger than his pride. As I walked out into the bright Austin sun, it felt like breathing clean air after years of smoke. For the first time in a week, I was no longer the one being cornered. Jason was the one backed into a corner, and the walls were closing in. By the time I arrived home, Amanda's car was gone from the driveway, a few of Jason's belongings already thrown into bags near the front door. He was nowhere to be seen. For a brief moment, I wondered if he had already run, but later that evening he returned carrying a bottle of whiskey, his shoulders sagging, his face aged 10 years in a single afternoon. He stood awkwardly in the living room before collapsing onto the couch, my couch, bought with my money, and said, Richard, we need to talk. His voice was hoarse, his eyes red. No, I replied firmly, we don't. But I'll give you 5 minutes. He poured himself a glass of whiskey with trembling hands and took a long drink before starting. I called my mom in Grand Junction, told her what happened. She said she always wondered how I could afford this place on my salary. She also said she noticed you always seemed to know more about real estate than you let on. He let out a bitter laugh. Turns out she was right. He took another gulp, then muttered, I called my boss, too. Told him I might need time off. He asked if I was having money problems again. My ears perked. Again? Jason nodded, shame written across his face. I borrowed against my 401k 3 years ago. Gambling debts. Emily never knew. He buried his face in his hands, shaking his head. God, there were so many things she never knew. Just then my phone buzzed with a text from Mark Davis. Police cruiser just drove by twice. Jason may have called them. I showed Jason the message. He shook his head quickly. Not me, but maybe Amanda. She was furious when she left. Almost on cue, flashing lights washed over the living room walls, and moments later there was a knock at the door. 2 uniformed officers stood there, serious but slightly confused. Mr. Miller? One asked. We received a call about a domestic disturbance, something about an illegal eviction. Jason appeared behind me, pale and defensive. I called them, he admitted finally. I thought maybe this was some kind of scam. The officer looked between us. Who lives here? I straightened my back. I own this property. I have the deed, tax records, and today's legal documents to prove it. I handed them a copy of the eviction notice signed by Linda. They reviewed it carefully. Mr. Carter, the older officer said, turning to Jason, This appears to be a legitimate eviction proceeding. Do you have any documentation showing ownership? Jason's voice was small. I thought my wife owned it. Your wife? The younger officer glanced at his notes. She passed away last week, correct? Jason nodded miserably. The officers exchanged a glance before the elder spoke. I'm sorry for your loss, sir, but without documentation of ownership, this is a civil matter. You'll need to resolve it through the courts. Jason's shoulders slumped, his last defense collapsing. What am I supposed to do? The younger officer softened his tone. Find somewhere else to stay while you speak with an attorney. Do you have family nearby? Jason muttered. My mom in Grand Junction. Then that might be your best option, the officer suggested. After they left, silence filled the house. Jason sat on the couch, staring at the floor. Finally, he looked up at me, his face etched with desperation. Richard, I know I don't have the right to ask, but could I stay until Monday, just to figure out where to go? I studied him carefully. The arrogance was gone, replaced by fear, regret, maybe even a flicker of humility. You can stay, I said slowly, but only in the guest room. And Jason, hear me well, no more packing, no more moving furniture, and absolutely no more touching Emily's things. This is my home, and you will treat it with respect until you leave. His eyes filled with tears as he nodded. Thank you. I'm sorry. For everything. I didn't answer. I simply walked upstairs to Emily's room, closing the door behind me, finally able to sit among her memories without someone rushing me to let them go. For the first time all week, I felt peace settling around me, fragile but real. Jason's time in that house was ending, and mine was just beginning again. Monday morning he would be gone, and I would stand in my home, not as a guest, but as the rightful owner who had guarded it quietly for nearly a quarter of a century. By Sunday afternoon, the neighborhood already knew what had happened, and I discovered quickly just how many people had been watching silently as Jason strutted and bullied his way through the years. I was out in the garden, finally pulling weeds in the flower beds Emily used to tend, when Mrs. Lee came over carrying a casserole dish wrapped in a checkered towel. Richard, she said softly, we owe you an apology. I looked up, brushing dirt from my hands. For what? She sighed, her eyes heavy with the kind of regret that only hindsight can bring. For not speaking up sooner. We saw the way Jason treated you. We thought it was family business, not our place. If we had known the truth that you owned this house, that you were carrying the weight, we would have done more. I took the dish, feeling the warmth through the towel, and shook my head gently. It wasn't your responsibility. Emily asked me to keep things quiet. She thought she was protecting him. Mrs. Lee's mouth tightened. Sometimes silence enables cruelty. Tonight at 6, the neighbors are gathering in your backyard. Consider it a welcome-back party for the real homeowner. True to her word, by evening my yard was alive with voices and laughter I hadn't heard in years. The Whitakers brought a bottle of wine. Mark Davis set up his old barbecue grill, and young Daniel strummed a guitar while children ran across the lawn. For the first time in nearly a decade, my home felt like a place of community rather than a prison of secrets. People raised glasses in my honor, telling stories of how Emily had always spoken of me with admiration, how she leaned on me for advice, how she quietly let me make the big decisions even while Jason paraded as head of the household. Mark leaned in during a quiet moment and asked the question everyone else seemed too polite to voice. Richard, how did you keep this secret for so long? All those years, letting him talk down to you, letting him act like he owned the place. I took a sip of wine before answering. Practice. And a daughter who asked me to. I wasn't angry most of the time. I was sad that Jason was so insecure he needed to belittle others to feel strong. Sad that Emily felt she had to protect his pride at the expense of honesty. Mrs. Whitaker overheard and shook her head. What's going to happen to him now? I set my glass down. He'll figure something out. He's not a bad person, just a weak one. Maybe losing everything will be the best thing that ever happened to him. Sometimes hitting bottom is the only way to start building something real. The gathering stretched long into the night, neighbors sharing food, memories, and relief that the truth had finally been revealed. I felt lighter with every story, every laugh, every reminder that though I had lost Emily, I was not alone. I had a community that cared, even if it had taken years for them to show it. The next morning, Linda called, her voice brisk but warm. "Richard, 3 reporters contacted my office. Someone posted about Friday's meeting on social media. You're trending as the secret millionaire next door." I groaned, rubbing my temples. "That's the last thing I want," she chuckled. "Maybe so, but it might also give you a chance to do some good. Think about it." Later, Rachel from Lone Star Bank called. "The real estate community is buzzing, Richard. People can't believe you stayed so quiet for so long. They're calling you a man of hidden generosity. How does it feel?" I thought about Emily, about the promise I had kept for her sake, and answered honestly, "It feels like the right time for the truth to finally breathe." That afternoon, Michael Turner reached out. "The city is exploring new affordable housing projects. We need experienced developers. Would you consider coming out of retirement, even just as a consultant?" I hesitated, but then realized Emily would have been proud to see me building again, this time for families who needed stability the way she once had. By the time the sun set on Monday, my phone had been buzzing non-stop with calls, offers, even a message from Channel 7 News asking for an interview. I declined the cameras, but agreed to a print piece about financial abuse within families, about how generosity too often becomes exploitation. I told them if my story could help one parent avoid what I had gone through, it would be worth it. Meanwhile, Jason was packing. I watched from the window as he hauled boxes to a rented truck, his movements slow and heavy, like a man carrying not just belongings but years of denial collapsing onto his back. He didn't look angry anymore, just hollow, as though Amanda leaving and the neighbors' whispers had finally stripped him of all pretense. When he finally knocked on my door to return, Emily's promise ring, the one I had given her at 16, his voice shook as he admitted, "She said this mattered more to her than her wedding ring. She wanted you to have it back." For the first time, my eyes burned with tears I couldn't stop. "Thank you, Jason," I said, and I meant it. He left quietly after that, climbing into his truck with no more fight left in him. As I stood in the doorway of 9,821 Willow Creek Lane, watching him drive away, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and release. I had lost a daughter, nearly lost my home, but I had found something unexpected in the ashes, the strength to set boundaries, the courage to reclaim my dignity, and the support of a community ready to stand beside me. For the first time in years, I felt like I truly belonged, not as a tenant, not as a shadow, but as the man who had built, preserved, and finally reclaimed his home. 3 months passed before I saw Jason again, and by then the man who returned to my doorstep was not the arrogant son-in-law who once tried to cast me aside, but someone thinner, quieter, worn down by life in ways only time and humility could manage. It was a crisp Sunday morning when the doorbell rang, and when I opened it, there he stood in a wrinkled shirt and worn jeans, his posture less confrontational, his eyes less hostile, as if he had been carrying a heavy weight and had finally set it down. "Richard," he began softly, "I hope it's all right that I came by." I stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind me, old habits reminding me that boundaries were still necessary. "It's your right to ring the doorbell," I said evenly, "but you don't come in unless invited." He nodded quickly, almost gratefully. "I understand. I just wanted to tell you something." He shifted uncomfortably, searching for words. "I've been living with my mom in Grand Junction, got a job with a smaller insurance company. Less money, but it's honest work, and I started seeing a therapist." His voice faltered, then steadied. "She's been helping me understand why I needed to feel important all the time, why I couldn't just accept what I had. I see now that I was so terrified of being seen as a failure that I convinced myself I was entitled to success, even if it wasn't mine." He paused, waiting for me to respond, but I let the silence stretch, forcing him to carry his own truth. "The hardest part," he continued, "is knowing Emily knew. She protected me from the truth because she thought I couldn't handle it. And maybe she was right. Back then I would have crumbled. But now I think facing it might have saved me sooner if I'd been forced to." A car pulled into the driveway just then, Linda arriving for our weekly business meeting. She had convinced me to come out of retirement, and we were reviewing plans for an affordable housing project downtown. Jason glanced at her, then back at me. "I should let you get to your meeting," he said quietly, turning to leave, but I stopped him. "Jason," he turned back, cautious hope flickering in his eyes. "Thank you for bringing me Emily's ring," I said. "That meant more than you know." He swallowed hard and nodded. "She would have wanted you to have it." Linda walked up the path, briefcase in hand, giving Jason a polite nod without breaking stride. He looked at me once more. "I know I don't have the right to ask, but would it be all right if I sent you a card on Emily's birthday? Just to let you know I'm thinking about her too?" I studied him for a long moment. The desperation was gone, replaced by something resembling genuine remorse. "That would be fine," I said finally. "But don't expect me to send one back. Forgiveness is a process, not an event." He nodded solemnly. "I understand. Thank you for giving me even that much." When he left, Linda and I went inside, spreading architectural drawings across the dining room table. She noticed my thoughtful mood and asked, "How do you feel about that?" I leaned against the chair, exhaling slowly. "Better than I expected. He seems like he's learning. Maybe someday we'll have a different kind of relationship, one built on honesty instead of assumption, respect instead of exploitation." She smiled knowingly. "Sounds like good principles for any relationship." Over the past 3 months, I had applied those principles everywhere. I reconnected with old colleagues in the development world, rejoined city planning committees, even began dating again a kind woman named Carol who valued me for who I was and not for what I could provide. I established the Emily Miller Foundation, a scholarship for students pursuing business and real estate, ensuring her name would live on in the dreams of others. I donated to the cancer research center that had treated her, hoping some part of her struggle might one day spare another family. Slowly, my house transformed as well. I kept the photos and heirlooms that mattered most, but I redecorated with my own touch, turning Emily's old bedroom into a home office where I could work again. It no longer felt like a shrine to loss, but a place where memory and life coexisted. On weekends, the yard filled with laughter from neighbors Mark flipping burgers on the grill, Daniel strumming his guitar, children racing across the lawn. The block parties Jason once avoided had become regular gatherings at my place, and I welcomed them gladly. Word of my story spread farther than I expected. Reporters called, real estate forums debated, people online labeled me the quiet millionaire. I never sought fame, but if my story reminded others that kindness should not be mistaken for weakness, then perhaps Emily's sacrifice carried meaning beyond our family. On one quiet evening, Carol and I sat on the porch watching the sun set over the Texas hills, and she asked, "Do you regret keeping the secret so long?" I thought about it, the years of swallowing my pride to honor Emily's request. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but I don't regret keeping her peace while she was alive. The real regret is that Jason mistook compassion for permission to abuse. That's the lesson I hope people take. Generosity must have boundaries." Carol took my hand, her touch warm and steady. "Then you've already won." And in that moment I realized she was right. I had my home, my dignity, my community, and even the faintest hope that Jason, broken as he was, might someday rebuild himself on something stronger than lies. For the first time in a long time, life wasn't just moving forward, it was moving forward with purpose. And that was enough. Monday morning broke gray and cool, the kind of morning that seemed to echo the gravity of endings and beginnings all at once, and I stood at the window with a cup of coffee in hand, watching as Jason slowly carried the last of his belongings into the rented truck. His movements were heavy, deliberate, the pace of a man dragging not just boxes but years of regret with every step. At exactly 9, Linda's process server arrived with the final paperwork, and Jason signed without protest, his hand shaking as if every stroke of the pen cut deeper into the life he once pretended was his. When it was done, he handed me a small box, his eyes damp. Inside was the promise ring I had given Emily for her 16th birthday, a modest piece of jewelry she had worn on her right hand until the day she died. His voice cracked when he said, "She told me to make sure you got this back. She said it meant more to her than her wedding ring." For the first time in this long ordeal, tears welled in my eyes, and I whispered, "Thank you, Jason." He nodded, turned toward his truck, then looked back one final time. "For what it's worth, Richard, you raised an incredible daughter. She loved you more than anything in the world." I watched him climb into the truck and drive away, the rumble of the engine fading down Willow Creek Lane until all that was left was silence. And in that silence, I felt something shift. Not triumph, not vengeance, but a weary sense of closure. The house around me felt lighter, as if years of tension had finally lifted. Over the following weeks, I reclaimed each room one by one, cleaning, repairing, and finally making them my own again. Emily's bedroom became my office, a place where I could work on plans for new affordable housing projects, the very kind Michael Turner had urged me to join. I decorated with a balance of old and new, keeping photographs and keepsakes that honored Emily's life, while also introducing furniture and colors that reflected who I was now. Neighbors dropped by often, Mark with his sharp humor, Mrs. Lee with fresh bread, the Whitakers with wine, and my home became a gathering place once more. On weekends, children's laughter drifted across the yard. Music strummed from Daniel's guitar. And for the first time in years, I felt not like a caretaker of someone else's legacy, but like a man living his own life. Beyond the walls of my house, life pushed forward too. The Emily Miller Foundation launched its first scholarship, awarding funds to 3 young students who dreamed of studying real estate and business. I attended the small ceremony at the community center, shaking hands with teenagers whose eyes shone with possibility, and I thought about how proud Emily would have been to see her name tied not to sorrow, but to opportunity. My work with Linda and Michael grew quickly, meetings with city planners and architects filling my calendar, and though I was technically retired, I found myself energized, driven by a renewed sense of purpose. And in quiet moments, I allowed myself to enjoy something I hadn't thought possible after Emily's passing. Companionship. Carol, with her steady warmth and easy laugh, became a fixture in my life, not to replace what I had lost, but to remind me that life still offered joy if I was brave enough to accept it. Looking back on those months, I realized that Jason's betrayal had forced me to reclaim not just my home but my dignity, to step out of the shadow of secrecy and live openly as the man I truly was. The pain of losing Emily would never leave me, but neither would the love she had given, a love that now found new expression in the scholarship fund, in the projects I helped build, in the community that gathered in my backyard, and in the laughter that once again echoed through the halls of my home. In the end, I understood that Emily's last gift was not the house, or the ring, or even the letter she left behind. It was the reminder that kindness and strength can coexist, that boundaries protect love rather than diminish it, and that life, no matter how fractured, can always be rebuilt with purpose and dignity. Life has a way of teaching us the hardest lessons through the people closest to us. What happened in my home was never just about property or money. It was about respect, gratitude, and the boundaries that define real relationships. For years, I let silence speak for me, believing that protecting Jason's pride was a gift to Emily. But silence without balance can invite abuse, and generosity without boundaries can turn into exploitation. When the truth finally came out, it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming dignity, honoring my daughter's memory, and reminding myself and others that kindness should never mean surrendering your self-respect. As I look back now, I don't see only loss. I see a community that stood with me when the mask came off. I see opportunities to build something lasting in Emily's name, and I see the quiet resilience that comes from choosing integrity over resentment. Maybe you faced something similar. A friend, a relative, someone who mistook your patience for weakness. If so, I hope this story reminds you that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Boundaries are not walls that keep love out. They are the framework that allows trust and respect to grow stronger. If this story resonated with you, don't let it end here. We share stories like this because they shine a light on struggles too many people face in silence. By joining this community, you're not only hearing these lessons, you're helping them spread to others who might need them most. So before you go, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, tap the bell icon so you never miss a story, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're listening from, and let us know if you've ever had to set boundaries to protect your own dignity. Your support means the world, and together we can keep these stories alive for those who need them most.